Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for yet another World Cup related video. I'm well aware that I've gone a little bit World Cup centric in recent times, but I thought this would also be a fun idea to research and bring to you all. Realistically, every single team who doesn't win the World Cup is, technically speaking, an underachiever, since most of them will have gone into the tournament with the expectation of winning the competition. But of course, given the format of the tournament, only one team can actually emerge victorious. However, there are some teams who are perhaps expected to win more than others but ultimately fall quite far short, and plenty of others who implode so spectacularly that it creates a shock of epic proportions which no one would have predicted going into the tournament. This video is all about those types of teams, as I'm going to look at every single World Cup to date and pick out one team whom I believe fell way short of pre-tournament expectations for one reason or another. Of course, just in case it's needed clearing up for whatever reason, this is done with the perspective on the team's quality at the time and not through modern day eyes. So for example, I'm not judging the Netherlands' 1934 first round exit based on their current status within the world game, but on their status when that particular finals took place. So as they weren't a dominant side in those days, they don't feature for 1934. I hope that's all clear, and a contrasting video, every World Cup's overachiever, will follow in the coming days. But for now, here is, in my opinion, every World Cup's underachieving side from 1930 right the way through to 2018. 1930, Brazil. The only nation to qualify for every single World Cup, it was perhaps inevitable that the Seleção would feature at some point in this video, and here they are kickstarting it all off. In a country still torn apart by racial division at the time, black players had only just been allowed to play for the national team, so there was a bit of tension in the squad, although they would undoubtedly underperform. In their first match, they lost 2-1 to Yugoslavia, which was essentially the final blow in their hopes of progressing, since their group only had 3 teams, only one would progress, and the other team in that group was Minas Bolivia, whom Yugoslavia and Brazil both beat 4-0. Brazil therefore had to make the not very long journey back home at the earliest possible opportunity. 1934, Argentina. Perhaps understandably considering the long travel route involved, no non-European side made it past the first round in the 1934 World Cup in Italy, and then, as a result of all of their losses, they had to duly make the same long-distance voyage back home. I've gone with Argentina, although I do admit that this is very harsh, as none of their squad members from the 1930 World Cup, when they finished as runners-up, went to the 1934 tournament, so they were completely inexperienced, but in their last World Cup appearance until 1958, they lost in the first round 3-2 to Sweden. I could have picked Brazil again, but I think 2 selections in a row would be a little bit unfair, so Argentina it is. 1938, Germany. I almost included Romania here purely on the basis that they lost to the minnows of Cuba, but the right answer here is Germany. A semi-final appearance in 1934, as well as the ability to include players from the Austrian Wunder team after the Nazi Anschluss of Austria, led to many outsiders thinking that they would go quite far. However, there was friction in the camp, as this lack of chemistry showed on the pitch, as they ended up losing to Switzerland after a replay in the first round. Germany don't often spectacularly underachieve at World Cups, so this was undoubtedly an aberration, although there is another instance later on where they do feature. I'd be very surprised if you couldn't guess which edition it might well be. 1950, England. England came into their first World Cup as firm favourites, certainly in the eyes of their own FA, and their squad could boast Stanley Matthews, Tom Finney, Alf Ramsey and Jackie Milburn, to name but just a few. After a win against Chile in their first game, nothing short of a thrashing was expected against the USA, but in perhaps the biggest shock of World Cup history, the USA stunned the Three Lions 1-0, with their goalkeeper, Frank Borghi, having the game of his life. Another 1-0 loss, this time against Spain, sealed their fate, and England would return home with their tails firmly between their legs. 1954, France. With a lot of the side consisting of players from the Stade de Reims side who would go on to dominate the French game in the next little while, and reach 2 European Cup finals in 4 years, including starman Raymond Kopa who would leave for Real Madrid before too long, France were finally expected to make a splash at a World Cup finals. They didn't. Despite their group having 4 teams, they would only play 2 matches as a result of the bizarre format of that particular tournament. And their first game was a loss to Yugoslavia, and as a result of Brazil's draw with the Yugoslavs, their final game win against Mexico proved immaterial, and the French went out at the earliest opportunity. France would have to wait another 4 years to prove themselves on the international stage. 1958, Hungary. Yes, the Hungarian team of 1954 had been absolutely decimated after the Hungarian Revolution, which led to many of their star players fleeing the country, but players like Juro Grosic, Josef Bosik and Nando Hideki, albeit all of them were now aging, had all stuck around for the 1958 finals in Sweden, with a blend of young talent also eager to prove themselves. However, their former coach Gustav Seibs remarked, "I have never seen a Hungarian team in such deplorable physical condition and nervous state." And it showed, as they drew with Wales and lost to Sweden. Although they then thrashed Mexico to finish second, the bizarre rules of this particular tournament required a playoff between teams who finished level in second and third, so Wales played Hungary again and beat them 2-1 to advance. The magic of the Magyars had well and truly faded. 1962, Spain. Spain's squad was managed by Catenaccio pioneer Helenio Herrera and contained Ferenc Puskás, albeit he was in his mid-30s, as well as future Ballon d'Or winner Luis Suarez. No, not the one who used to bite people for a living. This is a different Luis Suarez entirely. And the team would go on to actually win the Euros just 2 years later. However, in an admittedly difficult group containing the two future finalists in Brazil and Czechoslovakia, they struggled, only mustering one win against Mexico and losing the other two games, although they did put up a decent fight against Brazil in their final game. Still, finishing bottom of that group wasn't a clear reflection on the talent within that squad. 1966, Italy. Brazil, the previous tournament's champions, did exit at the group stage of the 1966 finals in England, but their players were subject to ruthless fouls on a frequent basis, so I'd count them as more unlucky than anything else. Italy, on the other hand, had no excuse. Italian clubs had won 3 European Cup titles in a row between 1963 and 1965, and their squad would see star men like Giacinto Facchetti, Sandro Mazzola and Gianni Rivera all on the plane to England. They started off with an unconvincing 2-0 win over Chile, before the USSR overcame them 1-0, and then came the ultimate humiliation, as Pak Duik scored the winning goal for North Korea to allow them to qualify at the Italians' expense. Returning to Italy in the early hours of the morning to avoid being spotted, they were nonetheless pelted with various objects by their fans when they touched down back in Italy. 1970, England. To be honest, no one spectacularly underachieved in 1970, and the teams who went out in the group stages weren't exactly powerhouses at the time. My absolute best shout therefore, even though I don't personally think they underachieved at all, is England, although to be fair, they did only score 2 goals in the group stages. Nevertheless, they still gave the eventual winners, and perhaps the greatest World Cup team of all time in Brazil, a really good game, only losing 1-0, and they only fell to West Germany after one tactical error and an unfortunate bout of food poisoning for their goalkeeper Gordon Banks, ruling him out of the game. Realistically, the Three Lions didn't have a bad tournament, although coming into it as the holders, they may have expected to go a little bit further than the quarters. 1974, Argentina. Okay, now that's more like it. Argentina would play 6 games at the finals and they would only win one of them, a 4-1 triumph over Minos Haiti in their final first group game to send them through to the second group phase. In the meantime, they'd lost to Poland and drawn with Italy, but once in the second group stage, they completely collapsed, as they were thrashed 4-0 by the Netherlands before losing to arch-rivals Brazil in the first match between the two nations at a World Cup. A final game draw with East Germany did nothing to help the situation, and they finished in last place in that group, behind the Germans. 1978, Scotland. You might be surprised to hear this, but Scotland actually had a phenomenal squad for this tournament, containing the likes of Graham Souness, Asa Hartford, Kenny Dalglish and Archie Gemmill, amongst many others. The only trouble was that their manager, Ali McLeod, didn't know how to use them properly, leaving out Souness in the opening 2 games, despite him, alongside Dalglish, helping Liverpool to win the European Cup that season. His absence would show in their first 2 games, as they lost to Peru and drew with lonely Iran, and then Willie Johnston tested positive for Fencam famine pills, being sent home in disgrace. The team finally clicked in their final group game against the Netherlands, with Gemmell scoring a sensational solo goal, which would later be immortalised in the film Trainspotting. But despite a 3-2 win, they needed to win by 3 clear goals to progress, so they ignominiously went out. It remains a fact to this day that Scotland have never progressed from the World Cup group stages. They've also tried about 8 times, just in case you're wondering. 1982, Brazil. It may seem a bit bizarre putting a team who is widely considered to be one of the best the World Cup has ever seen in a list like this, but they didn't win the tournament, despite being most people's tip to do so. Zico, Socrates, Falcao and co. wowed the spectators with some truly eye-catching displays, scoring 10 goals during the first group stage and bringing back the Brazilian style and attacking flair which had been lacking from their previous 2 World Cup campaigns. Ultimately though, they would lose to Italy in the second group stage, despite only needing a draw against the Azzurri to progress, and are now widely regarded as one of the best sides not to win a World Cup. 1986, Italy. Italy came into the finals in Mexico as defending champions, but whilst they didn't absolutely bomb, they certainly underachieved based on their previous success and their squad. Stars like Gaetano Scirea, Paolo Rossi and Marco Tardelli remained from before, and an injection of fresh blood with the likes of Gianluca Vialli and Giuseppe Pigomi must have led to a decent performance at the very least by the Azzurri. However, they very nearly exited the group stages, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat against the lowly South Korea after 2 1-all draws, but their luck ran out against France, who beat them 2-0 in the round of 16, and the Azzurri were on the plane back home. 1990, the Netherlands. The Netherlands boasted 3 of AC Milan's pivotal players who had won the European Cup in 1989 and 1990 in the forms of Marco van Basten, Ruud Gullit and Frank Rijkaard, alongside other star names like Ronald Koeman and Danny Blind. You might be surprised to know, therefore, that they didn't even win a single game at the finals, although since they have made an appearance on this list, you probably would have presumed that something would have gone horribly wrong at some stage. They drew all of their group games against Ireland, England and Egypt before falling to West Germany 2-1 in the round of 16, in a game overshadowed by Rijkaard spitting at Rudi Voller 3 times, including at least once into his luscious mullet. 1994, Colombia. Without question, this is the World Cup's most tragic underachieving side. Colombia have been tipped by some to be the dark horses of the competition, spearheaded by stars like Carlos Valderrama and Faustino Asprilla, with Pele for one, tipping them to go all the way. However, they lost to Romania in their first group game, and then Andres Escobar scored a decisive own goal against the USA to send Colombia packing, and their last game, a 2-0 win against Switzerland, made no difference. Upon their return, Escobar was shot dead, with the assailant shouting, "Gol," and Colombia wouldn't make waves at another World Cup until 2014. 1998, Spain. Real Madrid had just won the Champions League in 1998, and their El Clasico rivals Barcelona had won the league at a canter, so the squad was mostly a mixture of players from the two clubs, with a perfect blend of experienced players like Fernando Hierro and youth like Raul. However, mistakes by Andoni Zubizarreta in their opening game against Nigeria saw the Spaniards lose 3-2, and by the time they thrashed Bulgaria in their last group game 6-1, they had only mustered a draw with Paraguay, who beat Nigeria to progress ahead of the Spaniards. In one of the easiest World Cup groups of all time, Spain hadn't even got out of it. 2002, France. Here are just some of the names in this France squad, who only 4 years earlier, bear in mind, had actually won the whole tournament. You had Zinedine Zidane, Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, Vicente Lizarazu, Claude Makélélé, Lilian Thuram and Marcel Desailly. They're amongst the favourites for the tournament in Japan and South Korea, especially after a favourable group draw gave them Denmark, Senegal and Uruguay. They didn't score a single goal.
Not even one.
They would lose their opening game to Senegal and they never really recovered, drawing with Uruguay and then going down 2-0 to Denmark before boarding the plane home. Let me just reiterate, they didn't score a single goal.
What?
2006, Serbia and Montenegro. This was quite difficult, as no big team did a bad job at this World Cup, although Serbia and Montenegro really did let themselves down big time. Coming into the World Cup having only conceded once during qualifying, they were touted as potential dark horses, but instead they conspired to lose 1-0 to the Netherlands, which wasn't too bad a result, but then they completely capitulated, conceding 6 to Argentina without giving them a response. Their final game against the Ivory Coast, which was immaterial in and of itself, saw them take a 2-0 lead, only for them to concede 2 needless penalties for handball and lose 3-2. It realistically was a case of what might have been. 2010, France and Italy. The only tie in this video, the previous tournament's 2 finalists disgraced themselves in completely different ways. The French, only in the tournament via a Thierry Henry handball against Ireland in their playoff match, saw Nicolas Anelka being sent home after calling coach Raymond Domenech a son of a and the whole team went on strike in protest against the decision. They would end up losing to Mexico and South Africa, as well as drawing with Uruguay, and they finished last in the group. Italy, meanwhile, had perhaps the easiest World Cup draw known to mankind, only facing up against Paraguay, New Zealand and Slovakia, yet they could only splutter to 2 draws against Paraguay and New Zealand, and in the do-or-die game against Slovakia, they lost 3-2 to go home with the wooden spoon. It's impossible to pick one or the other, considering they both spectacularly imploded, so I decided to go with both. 2014, England. You don't need to tell me that the obvious answer here is Spain, considering they won the 2010 tournament before losing 5-1 to the Netherlands and Chile 2-0 in their first 2 group games at this tournament before exiting at the group stages. But I decided to go a little bit rogue and pick England. Like always, expectations were high going into the tournament, especially since it was the last chance for certain members of the golden generation to prove themselves on the international stage, and they had an influx of talented youth like Daniel Sturridge, Raheem Sterling and Jordan Henderson. However, with the difficult group draw of Uruguay, Italy and Costa Rica, they failed to win a single game, although they performed abysmally throughout, losing to Uruguay and Italy and only managing to scrape a 0-0 draw with Costa Rica in their final game, once Costa Rica had gone through and England was certain to go home. They would of course improve in Russia, but this was a blemish on England's World Cup history. 2018, Germany. There's only one answer here. Germany came into this as world champions, and they hadn't exited the tournament in the first round in some 80 years. A favourable draw saw them squaring up to Mexico, Sweden and South Korea, but they were stunned by the Mexicans in their opening group game, losing 1-0. They relied on a 95th minute Toni Kroos thunderbolt to edge past Sweden, but it all came caving in on itself in their final match against South Korea. Despite many German chances throughout the game, the Koreans capitalised on some poor defending to take the lead late on, and they confirmed the win after Manuel Neuer was caught halfway into the opposition's half, and Son Heung-min raced down the other end chasing the long ball and tapped it into an empty net. The Germans were out, and the World Cup curse struck again. Indeed, since 2002, only one team who went into the competition as holders, that being Brazil in 2006, hasn't gone out at the group stages. But that just about wraps up today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, of course, hit the like button and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. You can also follow me on various social medias, all of them are linked down below. But of course, as I say, there will be a similar video, but of course on every World Cup's Overachiever coming in the next few days, so stay tuned for that. But thank you very much for watching this video, and until next time, I'll see you then.